Hinds feet on high mountains.
High places.
High places. Okay. Oh my gosh. I actually wrote High Mountains because he keeps talking about the High Mountains. But it's an allegorical novel, and that's basically when you take ideas or principles and then you manifest them in things that are tangible. So there's characters or events or things along those lines. So the book's title actually comes from Habakkuk 3:19, which says, "The Lord's my strength, and He will make my feet like hinds' feet, and He will make me to walk upon high places." So this is where she brings the title of the book from. And the gist of the book, really, the whole thing is about our spiritual journey into trying to reach God, and the maturity in His love and understanding, and how we try and gain our spiritual life through Him and all the trials and tribulations that we come across it. It's a great book because the way that it's written, you can always kind of put yourself in the way the book that is written. So all the things that she goes through is always something you can kind of relate to in whichever way it manifests itself. So the main character, her name is Much Afraid, and she comes from the Valley of Humiliation, and she's a part of the family of fearings. So this is what allegories are. So it's basically taking these concepts and then just manifesting them in these ways. So Much Afraid lives in this Valley of Humiliation, and she lives a very dark life and quite depressed and very unhappy. She's been arranged to marry her cousin Craven Fear. It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
It is brilliant.
Yeah. And so she's struggling with all these concepts, and then she hears of the shepherd who is around, and he lives in these high places, and she wants to reach these high places. And because of this even small will of herself that she wants to meet him, he comes to her at one point, and he says to her, would you like to come and follow my path? And she says to him, of course I do, but I'm scared. Obviously not in those words, but in the same manifestation of concept. And he says to her, look, if you want to follow me, you have to come with me. The moment I call you, you come to me straight away, and I'll be singing the song to you. Once you hear it, you come to me. And so she gets really excited, and she's really wanting for him to call her. And so she goes back to her family, and all of them are hearing these things, and they see her talking to the shepherd. And all of a sudden, all of them actually want to do everything in their power to make sure that she doesn't go. So Craven Fear pulls her down, and they push her down, and everything along those lines, and they lock her up, and they put her into the bedroom, and she's trying to figure out a way to actually get out of the house, and she doesn't know how. So then she slowly starts to pray, and then her aunt, I forgot her name, completely spaced on it, but she's one of them that, I think it's Despair, Aunt of Despair. She calls for her, and she manages to come and frees her out of her will. And so then finally she starts running, because she wants to reach these valleys. And he tells her to meet her, and she hears the song again, and she goes to meet him. And then finally he finds her, and he says to her, why didn't you come to me when I called for you? And she said to him, because I was locked up, and everything was noise, and fear was holding me down, and my family was stopping me. And then he's like, yeah, but if you believe in me, and you have trust and faith in me, then you should be able to come to me. And so then he plants the seed of love in her. And he says to her, this is the beginning of when you start to come and discover me as a person. And right now, you have this will of wanting to love me, but you haven't reached it yet. And so you have to come with me and take the path that I tell you to take. And do not listen to Craven Fear. Do not listen to anybody along the way. But just have trust and faith in me and who I am. And she says, Lord, I will trust you in everything that I will do, and I will follow your path. So she starts her journey, and she basically leaves everybody. And sorry, before I forget, the shepherd gives her 2 companions. Sorrow and suffering. And he says to her, and they're quite big in black robes, and she can't see their faces, but she basically says to him, oh, no, I don't want to go with them. I don't want any sorrow or suffering on this journey. He said to her, no, if you trust them, if you have faith in them, you will be fine. And she's still very on the edge and doubtful about the whole situation, but she really wants to do it, so she still follows through with it. And so sorrow and suffering start walking with her side by side, and the shepherd says to her, I'm going to leave you, but if at any point in time you need me, just call my name, and I will come to you as quickly as I can. And so she starts, and she begins her journey, and she starts descending. And the first thing that she encounters was the detour through the desert, which is, when she starts walking, her assumption is that as soon as she begins this journey, she's going to start going up these mountains into these high places. But the first thing she encounters is this desert, this very empty desert that she has to go down into. And as she goes along with this, pride comes in the way. which is one of the people that are contacting her. And he comes and starts saying things into her ear, like, what are you doing? And he's just leading you astray. He's not actually doing anything good for you. You should be your own person. You should make your own decisions. This is your choice. Why are you doing this? Go back to your family. Go back to the people who love you. Why are you wasting your time? And she slowly starts to think about these things. And as she thinks about these things, the way that it works is it manifests in her body as well. So I forgot to say that she's quite an ugly person. And the way that he describes her, or she describes her, sorry, and her feet are crooked and she has a crooked mouth. And so every time pride comes or anybody comes along the way, she feels weak and she feels empty and she feels like she can't continue. And at this point in time is when she realizes she can start to use sorrow and suffering as her guidance. So when these things start to happen, she starts asking for help, and then they start to pull her up and they take her along the journey with her. And they're still pressuring her, and pride is telling her, like, go back, go back. And then she calls for the shepherd, and she says, the shepherd, I need you, please come to me. And then he comes to her. But he says to her, I'll help you out, but you need to make sure that you just don't pay attention to these things, because the more you give into it, the harder it becomes. And then all of a sudden, in the midst of this entire massive desert, she finds this small flower. And she walks up to it and she's really confused as to why it's here. And then the shepherd says to her, this is the flower of acceptance of joy. So if you learn to accept these things in your life, if you learn to accept all the bad that comes through your way, you can have joy in your heart and peace in your heart. She didn't really understand what these things meant, but she took the flower anyway with her. And she kept it with her along the journey. And she kept walking. And so they kept walking, and then they reached the shores of loneliness. It's just amazing the way that she actually talks about, like, how she takes the names of these things. And this is basically the place where you feel loneliness and you feel solitude. And when you're alone in your life and you feel like there's nobody else around you and you don't know what to do or how to do things. And really the only thing by your side is sorrow and suffering, if you think about it, because it's the only thing that kind of keeps you going, but it also makes you understand why you're in the situation that you are. So if you're lonely, it's for a reason, and it might feel like you're suffering for it, but at the end of the day, it gives you the sense of understanding of yourself. And the solitude actually gives you the capacity to be able to sit down and know what you actually need to do in your life. It's like self-reflection. So it's definitely a process we need to go through in our lives. And then along the way, as she's going through these processes again, she encounters resentment, bitterness, and self-pity. And they're all speaking into her ear, they're all saying to her, don't follow the shepherd of yours, it doesn't really make any sense. You poor girl, you're crippled and he's making you go through this whole thing. How bad is this shepherd of yours who doesn't care about you, doesn't put the effort in? And then trying to feed her with all these thoughts of just wanting to just step backwards, basically. But she starts to build this strength, and she calls for a shepherd again. And then slowly, you can start to see her transformation in the way that she actually encounters them. She listens to them, and she really actually starts to internalize the thoughts that they put into her mind. But then at the same time, she remembers the shepherd. And she remembers at the beginning when he tells her, if you have faith in me, and if you trust me, I will lead you on the right path. And no matter what you do, I will always be there by your side. So you just have to remember that. And so then what she actually ended up doing was actually plugging her ears. Or actually sorrow came up to her and said, just put these in your ears. And so it started to drown out the noise slowly. And then she realized the more that she just blocks it out and focuses just on the shepherd, things just become so simple and easy. And that's when she actually started to even learn about acceptance of joy, of that little flower that she found before. Because at that moment, she sacrifices herself and her heart to Christ completely, or to the shepherd completely. And from that point onwards, nothing really bothers her or phases her. So that's really when you start to see her transformation as a person and how that starts to change slowly and slowly. And then she goes into the precipice of injury, the great precipice of injury, which is a huge mountain. And then at this point, again, craven fear comes around and he says to her, look, you've already struggled so much and you've done all this, and here's the shepherd making you go through this ridiculous mountain that you're not going to be able to climb. And she starts obviously thinking about it. She's like, how can you put me through all of this? I've already done so much. What does he expect from me? I can't do it. It's not an option. And so she calls for him again. And he says, shepherd, I need you. Please be by my side. And he says to her, look, you can do this. I said to you, you can do this from the beginning. And I said to you, you have my faith and my trust. And you have your two companions. So where's the problem? And so she says to him, okay, I have faith in you. And it is the biggest trial that I'm going to face at this point in time. But I'm going to do it anyway. And so she starts to climb. And because she has this, again, this love in her heart that starts to grow, she actually finds that the ascent is not as difficult as she thought it would be. And she starts easing through it. She trips and she slips and she falls, and they pick her up, and she trips and she slips and she falls, and they pick her up. But she keeps going, and she actually makes it to the top of the mountain. And I actually forgot to mention this, but at the beginning as well, sorry, there's just so many details in the book, it's absolutely crazy. She builds an altar. Every time she goes through something or she learns a lesson, she builds an altar for where she learns it, and she picks up a stone and she puts it in her bag. So at the very beginning, when they had the problems with her trying to get into the mountain, and the Lord said to her, well, when the shepherd said to her, come up and take with me and we'll start this journey together, that was her first stone. When she went through the desert, she took another stone. When she went through the Valley of Losh, she went through another stone. So she basically picks them up and she does an altar, she takes her lesson, she learns from it, and she keeps moving. And so she does this again, she builds another altar, and this time she sheds her like dread and her will and everything that she thought she has control over. And again, she completely gives herself to the shepherd. I love this one. And then she finds another flower as she's going through this descent, which is bearing the cost. In other words, forgiveness. And so this was her next lesson, is basically learning how to forgive people and how to make sure that in her pastoral life, any cost that actually comes towards her, she can put that aside and have forgiveness and a sense of like a white heart where there's this purity of her that she can actually take that forward, rather than thinking about things in herself in the way that she used to before she started this journey. And again, she had pride, bitterness, self-pity, and grave and fear all along her side the whole journey, telling her, you're going to fall, you're going to hurt yourself, go back. And she tries to push through all of these things, and she really does at one point. And it's funny because even there's a little humor attached in the book, because at one point she starts throwing stones at them, and then suffer and sorrow and laughing, because you start, like I said, you see the transformation of the way that she thinks about these things. Because before it manifests itself so deeply in her that it actually casts so much doubt in a way that she doesn't feel like she can go through. But now she's reaching a point where even when they say these things, she can just pick up a rock and throw it at them and be like, well, stay out of my way. You're just annoying me now, so please move on. So they go through this ascent and they actually do it, and she's quite happy. And then she realizes her next step is the forest of danger and tribulations. And this one is actually quite tough for her to go through because it's just mist, thunderstorm, everything happening. So if you imagine probably one of those difficult moments in your life, imagine that as the forest of danger and tribulation. And she starts walking through it, but at this beginning she actually does it in a way that's quite peaceful. Where she's walking through these thunderstorms and she's hearing all these things, but she's not scared anymore. She's not really fearful of the things that work in her way. She just goes through it, but she's trying her best to be able to be patient with the whole situation, but in a way that she knows she can find God. And then in the midst of all of that, craven fear is also coming up to her. And there was this way that what the shepherd said to her at one point, he said, craven fear will paint a picture on the screen of your imagination, and you will walk with fear and tremble with agony. So it's important for you to ignore it. So if we think about fear all the time, it's your imagination, because fear is not really something that actually has happened. Fear is the unknown of what should be occurring or what can occur. But when we're scared of something, we're scared of it because we don't know what's going to happen. And because of that, we end up imagining a lot of different scenarios. And most of them are usually worst case scenarios. So when you're sitting there, you start building an image of what's actually going to happen, but it might not necessarily happen. And the fact that if you don't have faith in the Lord, if you don't have faith in people around you, you end up having these images, and it takes away from your simplicity and your peace and your joy that you try and find in yourself. And so when he said that, it struck quite true for me, just because fear is a manifestation we make. It is something we create in our minds. It is not a reality. It is not something that we know of. It is just something that we think may happen, but it might not necessarily. So yeah, you begin to see this change in her a lot, and even when they're in this forest, they manage to find this hut. And inside the hut, there's warm fire, there's food, there's everything that they need, and it's kind of like a little salvation that the shepherd gave them in the midst of all of this. And everybody is banging on the door, self-pity, bitterness. Everybody is saying, let me in. How can you be so harsh? How can you leave us outside here in the rain? And she just ignores them, doesn't pay attention to them. And she basically just continues, and they stay the night there until the storm subsides. And then they continue on their journey. I'll just be on forever. But I keep going. We go to the midst of this. If I'm missing something, please jump in.
So actually, you're at chapter 12 of the book, and because I want to leave you the rest of the book for next time, so let's go deeper into this. So
Let's go.
as she's walking and going from trial to trial. She takes along, and it says at one point in the valley of tribulation that pride was there with her. He'd been hurt, but
yes, when she actually pushed him down.
Yeah. So it says, then pride, who was still limping badly and seemed extra venomous as a result, said, "You know he," meaning the shepherd, "won't be able to rest content until he has put you to complete shame. Because that's the way he produces that precious humility he's so crazy about. He'll humble you to dust, much afraid, and leave you a grovelling idiot in front of everyone." And then it's as if pride and the devil is trying to show us that an aspect of God that isn't real, that God has to humble us by bringing us to shame, by really pushing us to the ground. Much afraid and her companions walked on without answering and without taking any notice. But as before, Much Afraid discovered that she limped more painfully whenever she heard what they said. It was really terribly perplexing. And just the way that the book describes these things, you know in your heart that this is what you've heard and what Satan tells you at different points, and it affects you. And
that's what I mean. I just can't do it justice, this book at all.
But
really,
actually,
the way she writes it.
Actually, we see it in a very, very nice way. Very nice way. You know, it attracted my mind and my attention completely. It was fantastic. But I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
It struck me at the beginning, because you said that he gave her 2 coins, suffering and sorrow.
2
And
companions.
this is, sorry?
2 companions.
Friends.
How can I have suffering and sorrow with me to help me to carry on the walking? I imagine the 2 coins would be hope and faith. That's my imagination.
Well, that's the thing. That's a great part about the book. Because at the end,
it will answer this.
Exactly, it definitely answers it.
Okay, because
that's why she was scared at the beginning when he said to her, "These are your companions," because who wants suffering as well as their companions? They
because
don't want.
I think maybe
I know,
if she got hope or faith, it will carry. Because I got hope that I will reach, and the faith is I'm going to reach.
But the hope and the faith and the joy and the peace, that's the outcome of where we have to be.
Of the sorrow.
The suffering and the sorrow is the process that takes us to where we need to get. So the suffering and the sorrow is the things, because even in the book she says it, where she says...
So not supporting her, but to give her company.
Yeah, to give, but also a sense of understanding too. Because when we suffer and when we have sorrow in our lives, we understand where God is most of the time, and that's when we're closest to Him.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? When you have joy and you have peace, you're quite complacent. And you don't really think about it as much. But every time we have the trial or we have a problem in our life and we are suffering and we have the sadness in our hearts, that's when you really look to God. And that's when you can have that strength to be able to pick yourself up and to actually search for Him. And this is why they're her companions, at least that was my understanding of it. Because at the beginning, in the process of it, she's still learning how to love God. She's still learning how to be a part of His life and to take His path. But the only way to be able to do that is if she goes through these processes. So these 2 companions of her at the end of the book, they do become transformed into something else. Because she herself becomes transformed into something else. And then it's really just so brilliantly written.
It's amazing. It's really amazing.
It's so brilliantly. That's what I'm saying. You need to
really well done. No, you said it. I don't think I would enjoy it the way you said it. It was really lovely.
Where else would you like to dissect a bit more? There's so many things to read in it.
It's amazing.
Anybody else want to?
Yeah, please add in.
Because you guys have read it. Oh, you've read it. I mean, I'm spoiled anything.
Because I remember Mary when her knees first attacked her and she suffered from them and she couldn't walk. Someone gave her this as a present, and my God, it really supported her. It really supported her and changed the way she thinks about her life. It changed her.
No, completely. And even when I picked up this book, I was going through stuff, and I was just like, wow, this is so appropriate. It was perfect timing for me. It really was.
And as it said, the whole way, all these things, you will say, not a time to say it's finished. Always despair is there, and all these negative things around us.
Absolutely, but it's just rooting your faith in God, which is really the main point of the book, is that we can't keep trusting ourselves to make these decisions. It's more about trusting God. And if you trust Him enough, there's nothing you're going to be scared of.
Yeah.
So even the name, Much Afraid, it's the whole concept of fear again. And if we have that faith in God, you won't be fearful. Because you know things are not in your hand, and you know that it's not in your control, but inevitably you'll end up in the path that you're supposed to be. And as long as you take that with His word and His way of being, then naturally it will be alright.
And the way you said it, because the way you said it makes it really clear and nice. First, she couldn't move because all this holding, and then she started. and she reached a stage when she threw them with the stones.
Exactly.
And a stage after, she didn't care. That was
Exactly. And she just started becoming complacent. But even as you see the fact that she progresses and she becomes better and she has more faith in God, you still see she falls.
Yeah.
And that gives you so much, not, I don't know if hope is the word, but I mean, it's so relatable in the sense that sometimes you feel like you've reached the point where you're quite comfortable with God. And then all of a sudden you drop again. And then you're like, okay, I have to pick myself back up again. And it's just the same concept, because you see the more that she gets there, the more she becomes a lot more comfortable with him. Something will happen that will just bring her down again. And it's even just these such small thoughts sometimes. They're very small doubts that are seated in your mind that can just start becoming spiraling out of control. And the more you think about it, the more it keeps going. And that's why you just have to put it to a stop. And it's literally just blocking the thought out of your mind and saying, I need to stop thinking about this, because the more you exercise it, the more it comes up. And then you start to even find excuses and reasonings to justify the way you think like that. And that's where pride and self-pity and bitterness and everything come in. Because it's easy to believe.
Yeah.
And even at one point, where I don't know who said it to her, but I think it must have been bitterness, but he said, the shepherd is leading you up the hardest path you could possibly take through this mountain. Everybody else is taking the easy path. Why are you going through this one? And she started to think about that. And then she was just like, well, no, this is what he's told me to do, and I'm going to keep doing it.
No.
But then it's exactly the same thing. We take the path of God sometimes, even in Christianity. And the struggles you have to go through on a day-to-day basis of people around you saying to you, why do you believe in God? Why does this make any sense? It's so silly. How can you have such strong faith in something that doesn't exist? And then you think, okay, so this is their path that they're taking. And obviously that does play in your mind, because you're like, okay, so what is the real answer? But then you also see a side in other people that they do have a sense of sadness. They don't have that joy. They don't have the happiness. They don't have the understanding of other people that you see, I think, with a lot of Christians that I see a lot of time. And when I see that, I think, no, I think I prefer my path than yours. Just because it seems so empty on the other side. It might be easy, but it's very unfulfilling.
I loved what you said, that she didn't like to hear what they say, I'm going to obey him.
Yeah.
He said that, I don't care. Is there, Allah, this is very nice.
You need to read this book, Auntie, really.
I enjoyed it already. Oh my God. It's beautiful. I wish everyone there. I like them to hear something like that. It's beautiful.
When we picked it up in our university meeting long ago with Uncle Michelle and Uncle Nabil, we all bought a copy and we all went chapter by chapter for a whole year through the book.
Why not we do a retreat and the thing it will be this book?
That's
Because
exactly
our all of us especially maybe
that's the best part.
this is you remind me of the retreat. Why
allegorical,
don't
but it's called allegorical.